Have you ever fished a spot where bass clearly should have bitten, but didn't? The lure passed right in front of them. The retrieve looked right. The conditions seemed fine. And still, nothing happened. It makes a lot of anglers wonder, do bass become hook shy? That idea sounds simple, but there are actually two different questions hiding inside it. The first is whether an individual fish can learn from danger. If a bass gets caught once, does it become more cautious the next time it sees a lure? The second question may be even more important. Are all bass equally catchable to begin with? Or are some fish naturally bolder, more aggressive, and easier to fool, while others are simply harder to catch from day one? That second question is where a famous long-term study becomes so interesting. In the mid-1970s, researchers working with the University of Illinois and the Illinois Natural History Survey used an experimental lake in Illinois to track largemouth bass over multiple years. This was not casual weekend fishing. Every angler visit was scheduled. Every catch was recorded. Every largemouth bass that was caught was measured, marked in the boat, and then released back into the same lake. That detail matters. The fish were not taken away. They were returned to the water, which meant the same bass could be caught a second time, a third time, or many times more. The record-keeping continued for 4 years. Then came the moment that made the study famous. After those 4 years, the researchers drained the lake and collected the bass that were still living there. In total, they recovered more than 1,700 fish. And the results showed two very different kinds of bass. Some fish were incredibly easy to catch. One bass was caught 3 times in the first 2 days of the study. Another fish was caught 16 times within a single year. In the same lake, under the same fishing pressure, those fish kept showing up in the catch records again and again. Why? Maybe they were more aggressive. Maybe they moved through areas that anglers covered more often. Maybe they were more willing to attack a lure. Whatever the reason, they kept making mistakes. But the most important fish in the study were the ones no one caught. Out of those 1,700 bass, about 200 were never caught even once during the entire 4-year period. They were not stocked later. They were there the whole time. Anglers kept fishing. Lures kept entering the water. Yet those fish never appeared in a single catch record. That works out to roughly 12% in that experimental lake. Now, that number should not be copied directly into every real lake or reservoir. Natural waters are larger, more complex, and full of more movement and structure. But the study still points to something powerful. The bass we catch over and over may not represent all the bass in the water. They may just represent the bass that are easiest to catch. The researchers then divided the fish into groups. Bass that had never been caught during the 4-year study were treated as low vulnerability fish. Bass that had been caught 4 or more times were treated as high vulnerability fish. Those two groups were bred separately. Low vulnerability fish produced one line of offspring, and high vulnerability fish produced another. When the offspring grew large enough to be fished for, the researchers placed them into common ponds and tested them again. The result was clear. The offspring of the high vulnerability bass were easier to catch than the offspring of the low vulnerability bass. And this was not a one-time effect. The work continued across many generations, and the difference between the two lines became more obvious over time. One heritability estimate in the research was reported at 0.146. That does not mean bass inherit intelligence like a human storybook character. It means part of catchability can be passed along biologically. Some bass are simply more likely to get caught than others. So, do bass get hook shy? If you mean, do they hold a grudge and remember a specific angler forever, the answer is probably no. Bass do not think like people. They are not building revenge stories in their heads. But if you mean that fishing pressure changes what we experience on the water, then yes, the effect is real. A bass population is not made of identical fish. Some are bolder. Some roam more. Some attack more quickly. Some are naturally cautious. And when a lake is pressured again and again, the fish that enter the catch record most often are not random fish. They are usually the most catchable part of the population. That means the phrase, "the fish got educated," may sometimes hide a different truth. It may not be that every bass in the lake suddenly became smarter. It may be that the fishing pressure kept filtering the population, leaving behind a higher proportion of fish that are harder to fool. That idea also changes the way we think about catch and release. Catch and release absolutely helps protect fish numbers. But this research suggests it may also shape which kinds of fish remain most common in a pressured fishery. If the boldest, easiest biting bass are removed again and again, or even just repeatedly stressed and selected, the fish left in the system may gradually lean toward lower catchability. The lake can still hold fish, can even look healthy on paper, but to the angler it feels tougher year after year. There is another layer to the story during the spawning season. Researcher David Phillip and others have pointed out that when male largemouth bass are guarding nests, removing them even briefly can create problems. During that gap, other fish may eat the eggs or fry. The bass may be released alive, but the nest may not survive the interruption. Tournament fishing in spring can make this even more complicated. Fish may be held in live wells, transported to weigh-ins, and then released far from the exact place where they were caught. Even if the fish survives, it is no longer in its original territory, structure, or nesting location. None of this means fishing automatically destroys a fishery, and it does not mean every released bass becomes a problem. What it does mean is that bass are not just mindless machines that chase every lure. A lake is not filled with one uniform kind of fish. Within that water are different personalities, different movement patterns, different levels of boldness, and different probabilities of being caught. Over time, fishing pressure can quietly reshape what remains below the surface. So the next time you fish a spot that used to produce and now feels stubbornly silent, do not rush to say there are no bass there. There may still be fish in front of you, fish that have not disappeared, fish that simply never gave themselves to the hook. Some may have learned from danger. Others may have always been difficult to catch. And after years of pressure, those two forces can stack together. In the end, the bass left in the water may not be the same kind of fish anglers were catching before. That is the real secret. Bass are not magical and they are not mythical geniuses. But they are also not simple creatures that bite anything that moves. And once you understand that, the water starts to look very different.